Why do the coordinates of the Great Pyramid of Giza, when written out to 8 decimal places, precisely reflect the speed of light in a vacuum, measured in meters per second? A coincidence, you say? A meaningless quirk of numbers. Now look closer at the base of the Sphinx. Geologists, not mystics, see undeniable evidence of large-scale water erosion, not from the gentle Nile, but from torrential rains. The kind of rains that have not fallen in this desert for at least 10,000 years. Who built a monument to eternity in an age of global floods, thousands of years before the first pharaoh was born? This is not a question of faith. It is a question of geology, mathematics, and a story of humanity that we have been telling ourselves incorrectly. A story with a missing first chapter. The stones of the Giza Plateau do not speak of primitive labor. They scream of impossible precision. Look at the granite coffers inside the king's chamber, cut from a single block of Aswan granite, harder than steel. The internal corners are so perfectly square, the surfaces so flat, that modern engineers struggle to replicate them even with laser-guided machinery. The official story tells us this was achieved with copper chisels and stone pounders. It is an insult to our intelligence and an affront to the men who built it. They left us a message not in hieroglyphs, but in the universal language of mathematics. The proportions of the Great Pyramid encode the values of pi and phi, the golden ratio, with staggering accuracy. They describe the precise dimensions of our planet, its circumference, its polar radius, on a scale of 1 to 43,200. They knew. How did they know? The textbook answer is that it is all a grand coincidence, a statistical anomaly, a result of forcing patterns onto random data. The academic world builds fortress walls of skepticism around these questions, dismissing anyone who dares to ask them as a charlatan or a fool. But while the guardians of orthodoxy sleep soundly, a quiet revolution has been brewing for decades. It began not in university halls, but in the lonely studies of mathematicians, pilots, and rogue engineers. They started with a simple, almost childish idea. What if Giza was not an isolated miracle? What if it was a single point on a map that spans the entire globe? They took the coordinates of other inexplicably advanced ancient sites, Machu Picchu, Stonehenge, Angkor Wat, and began to plot them. The pattern that emerged was terrifying in its coherence. Lines of longitude and latitude connected these ancient wonders with a precision that defied chance. The Great Pyramid, it turns out, sits at the geographical center of Earth's landmass. A line extending from it at an angle of exactly 30 degrees north of east runs directly through Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan and culminates at the mysterious White Pyramids of Xi'an, China. Another line connects Easter Island, the Nazca Lines, and Giza. They are not random dots on a map. They are nodes in a network, a global grid, a whisper of a single planetary project, conceived and executed on a scale that dwarfs our most ambitious undertakings. They didn't just build monuments, they built a planet-sized machine. What was its purpose? A communications network? An energy grid? A celestial observatory designed to track cosmic cycles over millennia? The questions multiply, each more unsettling than the last. To even consider this hypothesis is to commit academic suicide. It requires us to accept that a civilization with advanced knowledge of geodesy, astronomy, and engineering existed in a time we call the Stone Age. It means that history is not a straight line of progress from cavemen to astronauts, but a cycle of catastrophic loss and slow recovery. We are not the pinnacle of creation. We are a civilization with amnesia, living amongst the ruins of a forgotten golden age. The evidence is not hidden in esoteric texts. It is carved into billion-ton monuments that litter our planet. The establishment calls it pareidolia, seeing patterns where none exist. But when the same mathematical constants appear in the architecture of Egypt and the calendars of the Maya, when the same construction techniques are found in Peru and on a remote Pacific island, coincidence becomes a very thin shield for ignorance. History is not a book that is read, but a crime scene that is investigated. And the clues left at this global crime scene point to a single, unseen architect. The architects of this system were obsessed with astronomy, not just the simple observation of the sun and moon, but the deep, slow cycles of the cosmos. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with an accuracy that would not be matched until the 20th century. The entire Giza complex is a perfect terrestrial map of the 3 stars in Orion's belt as they would have appeared in the sky 10,500 years before the Common Era. This is not the work of Bronze Age farmers. It is the work of people who understood the precession of the equinoxes, the 26,000-year wobble of our planet's axis, a cycle so long, so subtle, that discovering it requires millennia of continuous, precise observation. Or it requires inheriting that knowledge. They built for eternity, and they built to last through cataclysm. They used stones weighing hundreds, sometimes thousands of tons. They fitted them with a precision that is airtight and earthquake-proof. We, with our steel and concrete, build structures that crumble in a few centuries. They built eternity out of granite while we are learning to build problems out of concrete. They were sending a message across the ages, a message we are only now beginning to decipher. And it seems to be a warning. The world's ancient myths, from the Sumerian flood epics to the Hindu tales of yugas, all speak of previous ages of mankind, of advanced civilizations destroyed by global catastrophes. We dismiss these as fairy tales, but what if they are distorted memories? Faint echoes of a real historical trauma passed down through generations of survivors who lost the science but retained the story. The myth of Atlantis is not a story about a single sunken island. It is a global memory of a sunken age, an age of gods who walked the earth, who measured the stars, and who left behind a blueprint for their own resurrection. This blueprint is the ghost in our historical machine. It is the anomaly that breaks every accepted model of the past. To follow its trail is to walk a path of intellectual heresy, to be branded a crank and a pseudo-scientist. But the stones do not lie. The numbers do not lie. The stars do not lie. The silence from the academic world is not the silence of reason. It is the silence of fear. Fear of a truth that would require every history book on the planet to be rewritten. A truth that suggests we are not who we think we are. And we are certainly not the first. What would you feel standing before this evidence? Do you see a deliberate, intelligent pattern, or is it all just a coincidence-fueled fantasy? Write what you think in the comments. We are just getting started. The whisper of this global plan, this impossible blueprint, is not just found in the sands of Egypt. It screams from the thin, cold air of the Andes Mountains, 4,000 meters above sea level. Here, in what is now Bolivia and Peru, stand structures that make the Great Pyramid look like a child's toy. They are a testament not to mathematics, but to a level of engineering and technology that is, quite simply, impossible. At a site called Pumapunku, scattered across a desolate plateau, lie blocks of diorite and andesite, some of the hardest stones on Earth. They are cut with the precision of a laser, perfectly straight lines, 90-degree angles, and complex interlocking shapes that fit together like a giant three-dimensional puzzle. Some blocks have rows of small, evenly spaced holes drilled into them, as if by a high-speed power tool. Archaeologists tell us the local Tiwanaku culture did this with stone hammers and sand. That is not an explanation, it is an absurdity. Consider the infamous H-blocks of Pumapunku. Each is a masterpiece of symmetrical, intricate stone carving. To produce just one of these with the primitive tools available to the Bronze Age Tiwanaku would have taken more than a lifetime. There are dozens of them lying broken and scattered as if by a cataclysm of unimaginable force. Geologists have studied the cuts. They report that the grooves are perfectly uniform in depth, with no sign of the slight variations that would be inevitable with manual tools. The finish is glass smooth. It is evidence of machining, of lost technology. The local Aymara legends do not speak of hammers and sand. They speak of giants who built the city in a single night, using a magic that made the stones soft as clay and moved them through the air with the power of sound. Travel north to Cusco, the ancient capital of the Inca Empire. The foundations of this city are built upon the ruins of a much older, far more sophisticated culture. You can see it in the walls. The upper layers are made of small, rough stones held together with clay mortar, the famous work of the Incas. But the foundations are something else entirely. They are composed of massive polygonal blocks of granite, some weighing over 100 tons. They are fitted together so perfectly with such complex multi-angled joints that you cannot slip a razor blade between them. This is the work of the so-called Viracochas, the white, bearded gods who, according to Inca legend, arrived after a great flood and taught the survivors the arts of civilization before vanishing into the sea. The fortress of Sacsayhuaman, overlooking Cusco, is the ultimate expression of this impossible stonework. 3 massive tiered walls built in a zigzag pattern stretch for nearly 600 meters. The largest stone in the lowest wall is estimated to weigh over 200 tons. Think about that. 200 tons, the equivalent of 300 cars. The quarry was kilometers away up and down steep mountain slopes. The Incas had no wheels, no draft animals capable of moving such weights, and no iron tools. How did they cut these stones from the bedrock? How did they transport them? How did they lift them and fit them into place with such flawless precision? The official guides will offer charming stories about tens of thousands of laborers using logs and ropes. What would you feel standing at the foot of that wall, realizing that all of our modern technology, our giant cranes and transport vehicles, would be strained to the limit to replicate this feat? It is a monument to a lost science. Throughout the 20th century, dozens of expeditions, both official and clandestine, tried to unravel the secrets of Andean construction. Many ended in tragedy. The British explorer Percy Fawcett vanished in the Amazon searching for a lost city he believed held the key. Others returned with strange tales of ancient acoustic devices that could levitate stone, or chemical compounds derived from rare plants that could turn rock into a malleable paste. These stories were dismissed as jungle fever fantasies, yet the evidence remains. In some ancient quarries, you can find stones that appear to have been scooped out, as if with a giant ice cream spoon. The rock flows and melts in ways that defy natural erosion. The greatest mystery of the Andes sits even higher than Cusco. The city of Tiahuanaco, near Pumapunku, is a sprawling ruin at an altitude where agriculture is barely possible. But the archaeology tells a different story. The surrounding area was once supported by a vast, sophisticated system of canals and raised fields that could feed a large population, and most disturbingly, geological and archaeological evidence suggests that Tiahuanaco was once a major port. A port at 4,000 meters altitude in the middle of a mountain range. Core samples drilled from nearby Lake Titicaca have found layers of saltwater sediment and oceanic fossils. The only way Tiahuanaco could have been a seaport is if the Andes Mountains themselves were thousands of meters lower or the sea level was thousands of meters higher. Either scenario implies a geological cataclysm on a scale that rewrites the history of our planet. This is the Andean paradox. We see the handiwork of a civilization that possessed a technology in some ways superior to our own. They could engineer on a scale that we can barely imagine. Yet they left no writing that we can decipher, no explanation of their methods. They left only the silent, imposing stones. It is as if the knowledge belonged to a very small elite who vanished in a catastrophe, leaving the survivors to build a new world on top of their ruins, worshipping the incomprehensible works of their ancestors as the creations of gods. The silence of the stones is the silence of a forgotten world. The clash between myth and science here is a bitter one. Archaeologists catalogue pottery shards and bone fragments, meticulously building a timeline of primitive cultures. They refuse to address the elephant in the room, the megalithic foundations that predate those cultures by millennia. To do so would be to admit that their entire framework is wrong. So they ignore it. They call the impossible walls Inca work, even though the Incas themselves admitted they did not build them. They were merely the last inheritors of a sacred place whose origins were lost in the mists of time. This denial is not just intellectual stubbornness, it is a deep-seated cultural fear. The implications of Pumapunku and Sacsayhuaman are simply too profound. They suggest a cycle of history that is not to our liking. We want to believe we are the apex, the inevitable result of millennia of progress. The Andean ruins tell us we are not. They are a permanent, humbling reminder of our own technological adolescence. They stand as proof that it is possible to have immense knowledge to build for eternity and to still be wiped from the face of the earth, leaving behind only puzzles that mock the arrogance of future generations. The mystery of the white gods like Viracocha, who brought knowledge after a global flood, is not unique to the Andes. It is a story that echoes across the world, from Mesoamerica to Sumeria, a recurring myth of survivors and teachers. As we leave the thin air of the mountains, we follow the trail of these myths into the dense, suffocating jungles of Central America. Here, a different kind of civilization rose and fell, one that matched the engineering prowess of the Andes with an intellectual achievement in mathematics and astronomy that was, if anything, even more staggering. They were the Maya, and their sudden, catastrophic disappearance is one of the greatest detective stories in human history. The knowledge they possessed of the cosmos, a knowledge far exceeding their supposed technological level, points back to that same unsettling source, a legacy inherited from a drowned world. The Mayan civilization of Mesoamerica presents us with a jarring contradiction. Here was a people who, according to mainstream history, were essentially a Stone Age culture. They had no metal tools, no wheel for transport, and practiced a form of agriculture that was brutally labor-intensive. Yet from this supposedly primitive foundation, they erected cities of breathtaking architectural complexity and developed a system of mathematics and astronomy so advanced it continues to baffle modern scholars. Their cities, like Palenque, Tikal, and Chichen Itza, were not random collections of buildings. They were precise celestial clocks, built to mirror the movements of the stars and planets. The layout of Teotihuacan, the great mother city that predated the Maya, is a perfect scale model of our solar system, with its temples marking the orbital distances of the planets, including Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, planets that were not officially discovered by modern science until the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, respectively. Where did this knowledge come from? The conventional answer is that the Maya acquired it through centuries of patient naked eye observation. But this explanation frays at the edges. Consider their calendar. The famous Mayan long count calendar is more accurate than our own Gregorian calendar at measuring the true length of a solar year. More than that, it tracked the cycles of Venus with an error rate of just a few hours over 500 years. It also contained calculations for the precession of the equinoxes, that 26,000-year cycle that speaks of an impossibly long view of time. To create such a system from scratch would require continuous, meticulously recorded observations stretching back for millennia, far longer than the Mayan civilization itself is believed to have existed. Was it the result of their own genius, or was it an heirloom? A piece of inherited knowledge, the crown jewel of a legacy passed down from a much older source. This intellectual brilliance was paired with a culture of shocking brutality. Their sacred rituals involved elaborate forms of human sacrifice and bloodletting, performed to appease gods who seemed to be cosmic forces rather than simple deities. It is a disturbing paradox, the highest astronomical science coexisting with the most primitive savagery. Was this a civilization in its prime, or one in a state of advanced decay? A culture that had retained the complex formulas of their ancestors, but had forgotten the underlying science and philosophy, turning it into a rigid, fearful religion. They knew what would happen in the heavens, but they no longer knew why. Their rituals were a desperate attempt to maintain a cosmic balance they no longer understood. Then, around the 9th century of the Common Era, it all stopped. In the space of just a few decades, the great Mayan cities of the southern lowlands were abandoned. The population collapsed by as much as 99%. Grand plazas, once teeming with life, fell silent. Intricate stone carvings were left unfinished. The jungle, always waiting, moved in to reclaim what was hers. For centuries, the cause of this sudden collapse has been one of archaeology's most profound mysteries. Theories range from endemic warfare and ecological disaster to a prolonged drought or a devastating plague. But none of these theories fully explains the speed and totality of the abandonment. It was not a slow decline, it was a panicked flight. A civilization that had mapped the heavens seemed to simply walk away into the jungle and vanish. Did their calendars predict a catastrophe they could not prevent? Did they encounter something in their cosmic observations that terrified them into silence and dispersal? The tragedy of the Maya is compounded by an act of cultural vandalism that stands as one of the great crimes in history. In the 16th century, the Spanish conquest arrived. Leading the charge to convert the Maya to Christianity was a Franciscan friar named Diego de Landa. He saw the Mayan writing system, their intricate hieroglyphs and bark paper books, as the work of the devil. In a single infamous act of fanaticism, in the year 1562, he ordered the collection and burning of every Mayan codex he could find. Thousands of books, their history, their science, their prophecies, their understanding of the universe, were turned to ash. Only 4 are known to have survived. It was a deliberate, targeted destruction of knowledge. We will never know what was lost in those flames. Was De Landa simply a religious zealot? Or did he and his superiors recognize something in those texts that was profoundly dangerous to their worldview? Something that spoke of a history of the world, of cycles of creation and destruction that could not be allowed to survive. The few surviving texts, combined with the stone inscriptions, give us a glimpse of their cosmic obsession. They believed the world had been created and destroyed 4 times before their own era. They believed they were living in the 5th age, or the 5th sun, which was destined to end in a series of cataclysms. This belief in cyclical destruction is not uniquely Mayan. It is a cornerstone of ancient thought around the globe, from the Hindu Yugas to the Norse Ragnarok. It is the persistent, nagging memory of the global blueprint civilization. The Maya were perhaps the last culture to have direct access to the mathematical and astronomical core of that ancient knowledge. They were the inheritors of the science, and their collapse may have been the final echo of the original catastrophe that wiped out their benefactors. The jungle that swallowed the Mayan cities is a powerful metaphor. Knowledge, even the most profound, is fragile. It can be lost. Civilizations, even the most brilliant, can fall. The Maya left behind ghost cities and an astronomical legacy that defies explanation. They are another piece of the puzzle, another data point on the global grid. Their story is a warning that even the most sophisticated understanding of the cosmos is no guarantee of survival. Sometimes, knowing what is coming is the greatest curse of all. As we move from the overgrown temples of Mesoamerica, we find this pattern of impossible engineering and tragic collapse repeated on the most isolated patch of land on Earth, an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Here, a lost people engaged in an act of megalithic madness that, even more than the pyramids or the walls of Sacsayhuaman, defies all rational explanation. In the vast, empty expanse of the Pacific Ocean lies the most remote inhabited place on the planet, Rapa Nui, or Easter Island. It is a tiny triangle of volcanic rock, more than 3,700 kilometers from the coast of Chile and 2,000 kilometers from the nearest populated island. When Europeans first arrived in the 18th century, they found a stark, treeless landscape and a small, struggling population living in primitive conditions. But they also found something that made no sense. Standing guard along the coastline and scattered in quarries inland were nearly 1,000 colossal stone statues, the moai. Carved from the island's volcanic tuff, these monolithic figures stand up to 10 meters tall and weigh as much as 80 tons. They are a feat of engineering that seems utterly impossible for a small, isolated society with no timber for levers or rollers, no draft animals, and no metal tools. The mystery of Easter Island is a paradox wrapped in an enigma. How did a tiny population, estimated to be at most a few thousand people, manage to quarry, transport, and erect so many of these giants? The oral traditions of the Rapa Nui people speak of mana, a spiritual power. They say the statues walked from the quarry to their platforms, the ahu, commanded by powerful priests. Modern theories are less magical, but no less incredible. The dominant academic theory suggests the island was once covered in palm forests. The islanders, obsessed with statue building, cut down every last tree to use as rollers and levers, leading to an ecological collapse, soil erosion, famine, and civil war, which ended their civilization. It is a tidy, cautionary tale for our own age. And it is almost certainly wrong. Recent studies of the island's geology and archaeology have poked gaping holes in this self-induced ecocide theory. Evidence suggests the island was never heavily forested, and the logistics of moving an 80-ton statue, even with abundant timber, are staggering. Numerous experiments by modern researchers to replicate the feat using supposed primitive methods have been spectacular failures, managing to move only the smallest statues very short distances with enormous difficulty. The islanders would have had to be engineering geniuses, and they would have had to dedicate their entire existence, every man, woman, and child, to this single Herculean task for centuries. Why? What could possibly motivate a people to engage in such a monumental, seemingly pointless, and ultimately self-destructive effort? The answer may lie in what the moai represent. They are not just statues. They are containers for a lost power, echoes of a forgotten technology. The official story paints the Rapa Nui as victims of their own irrational obsession. But what if it was not obsession? What if it was desperation? What if they were the descendants of a far more advanced group who were marooned here, and the statue building was a ritualistic cargo cult, a frantic attempt to replicate the deeds of their ancestors, hoping to reactivate a power they no longer understood? The later stages of statue carving show signs of this desperation. The statues become larger, more ambitious, as if they were trying to shout ever louder into a silent sky. The final and largest moai ever quarried lies unfinished at Rano Raraku. It would have stood over 21 meters tall and weighed 270 tons. It was an act of pure, magnificent madness. An act of a people who had forgotten the song but were still trying to hum the tune. Half a world away, in the Micronesian islands, lies an even more baffling ruin, the city of Nan Madol. Built on a coral reef off the coast of the island of Pohnpei, it is a vast complex of 92 artificial islets, constructed from colossal, prismatic basalt logs. These logs naturally formed columns of volcanic rock, weigh between 5 and 50 tons each. Over a period of several centuries, the builders of Nan Madol quarried and transported an estimated 750,000 tons of this black basalt. They brought it from the other side of the island, somehow transported it across land and sea, and then stacked it like firewood to create massive walls and platforms crisscrossed by a network of canals. It is a Venice of stone built in the middle of nowhere. The sheer scale of the undertaking is mind-boggling. The total weight of the stone used at Nan Madol is greater than that of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Modern engineers have stated that it would be impossible to replicate Nan Madol today, even with all our technology, due to the logistical nightmare of moving that much weight in such a remote, difficult environment. The local legends, like those on Easter Island, speak of magic. They tell of two sorcerer brothers who arrived from afar and used the help of a flying dragon to levitate the massive stones into place. Behind the myth, there is a hard, physical reality that defies explanation. There is also a palpable sense of dread. The site is associated with strange lights, magnetic anomalies, and a profound feeling of unease. Local people refuse to go near it after dark. Both Easter Island and Nan Madol represent the ultimate dead end of the megalithic blueprint. They are monuments of extreme isolation. Whatever knowledge or technology was used to initiate these projects, it eventually withered and died, leaving the inhabitants trapped in a cycle of ritualistic repetition and eventual collapse. They are the loneliest ruins on Earth. They show us the fate of civilizations that become disconnected from the source of their knowledge. They lose the why and are left only with the how, and even that fades with time. The wars that racked Easter Island, which led to the toppling of the Moai, were not just fights over scarce resources. They were likely a violent backlash against the failures of the old religion, a furious rejection of the stone gods who no longer answered their prayers. A civilization's descent into madness is a terrible thing to witness, even in the faint reflection of archaeology. What is the greater tragedy, a society destroyed by its own foolish obsession, or one crushed by the weight of a legacy it could no longer uphold? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The trail of the blueprint does not end at the edge of the world. It leads us next to the heart of ancient empires, where sacred geometry became a tool for power, politics, and war. From the desolate solitude of the Pacific, the trail of the global blueprint leads us to the humid, teeming jungles of Southeast Asia. Here, the architectural principles we have seen elsewhere, astronomical alignment, sacred geometry, and massive stone construction, were not left as silent enigmas. They were integrated into a vibrant, living religion, becoming the engine of a powerful empire. We are at Angkor Wat, in modern-day Cambodia, the largest religious complex on the planet. Built in the 12th century, it is a masterpiece of symmetry and symbolism, a stone microcosm of the Hindu universe. But it is far more than just a temple. It is a precise astronomical instrument, a giant stone mandala whose very layout is a map of the heavens. Angkor Wat is oriented to the west, a direction associated with death in Hindu tradition, which has puzzled scholars for centuries. Yet its true purpose is revealed twice a year. On the spring and autumn equinoxes, an observer standing at the western entrance can watch the sun rise directly over the central tower of the temple. This is not a coincidence. The entire complex is a celestial calendar, its causeways and towers designed to track the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. The dimensions of the temple, its moats and enclosures, correspond to the durations of the great Hindu ages of the universe, the yugas. It is a machine for charting cosmic time, built on a scale that is almost impossible to comprehend. The builders of Angkor were not just priests, they were master astronomers and geometricians, inheritors of a sacred science. This sacred science, however, was also a tool of immense power. The Khmer kings who built Angkor were not just rulers, they were god kings, Devarayas. Their authority was derived from their role as intermediaries between the earthly realm and the celestial one. By building a perfect model of the heavens on earth, they were not just honoring the gods, they were harnessing their power. Angkor was the axis mundi, the pivot of the world, and whoever controlled it, controlled the empire. This fusion of spiritual knowledge and political power led to centuries of brutal warfare. The history of the Khmer Empire is one of constant conflict with neighboring kingdoms, all vying for control of this sacred center. The secret underground passages that are rumored to exist beneath Angkor were not just for priests, they were strategic tunnels in a long and bloody game of thrones. Half a continent away, in the heartland of China, lies another piece of the Asian puzzle, one that is shrouded in far more modern secrecy. These are the so-called Chinese pyramids, dozens of massive earth-mound tombs scattered across the plains near the ancient capital of Xi'an. For most of the 20th century, their existence was a rumor, a legend among pilots who flew the hump over the Himalayas during World War II. They reported seeing a colossal ivory-white pyramid that would have dwarfed the Great Pyramid of Giza. For decades, the Chinese government denied their existence, but with the advent of satellite imagery, the secret was out. The plains are covered with them. Unlike the pyramids of Egypt, these structures are mostly unexcavated. The area is a forbidden zone, heavily guarded by the Chinese military. Why the secrecy? The official explanation is a desire to respect the ancient emperors buried within. But there may be another reason. The layout of the largest pyramids near Xi'an mirrors the constellation Gemini. This is another echo of the as above, so below principle we see at Giza with Orion and at Teotihuacan with the solar system. It suggests that the ancient Chinese were also part of this global tradition, this planetary project of celestial mapping. What the Chinese government may be hiding is not just the treasures of dead emperors, but evidence of a history that contradicts their official narrative, evidence of a connection to a global civilization that predates their own. The struggle to uncover the truth about the Xi'an pyramids is a modern-day spy thriller. Dissident Chinese archaeologists who have tried to publish their findings have been silenced or have disappeared. Western researchers are denied access. The flow of information is tightly controlled. This is not ancient history, it is a contemporary battle for knowledge. The ancient blueprint has become a matter of national security. In a world where national identity is often built on a story of unique, indigenous development, the idea of a shared global heritage from a single, advanced source is a politically explosive concept. It undermines the very foundations of nationalism. The connection between Angkor, Xi'an, and Giza is more than just thematic. As mentioned before, they lie on a single, straight line that circles the globe, an axis of ancient power. This is the global grid, rendered in stone and earth on a continental scale. It suggests a level of planetary surveying and coordinated effort that should have been impossible for ancient, disconnected cultures, unless they were not disconnected, unless they were all working from the same set of plans, left behind by the same master architects. In Asia, the search for the blueprint moves from the realm of archaeology into the world of geopolitics and intelligence. The artifacts are not just objects of historical curiosity, they are symbols of power and potential keys to lost science. The team that deciphers the full meaning of Angkor's geometry or gains access to the secrets beneath the White Pyramid of Xi'an might gain more than just knowledge. They might gain a technological or philosophical advantage. The ancient war for control of the sacred centers continues today, fought not with swords and spears, but with satellite surveillance, information suppression, and clandestine operations. The wisdom of the ancients has become a prize in the great game of modern empires. This forgotten science, however, also had a much darker, more primitive expression, a bloody echo that reverberated through the mist-shrouded landscapes of ancient Europe. As we turn from the sophisticated state-sponsored religions of Asia, the trail of the blueprint leads us into the fog and forests of what was once considered barbaric Europe. Here, among tribes who possessed no writing and lived in wooden huts, we find some of the oldest and most enigmatic megalithic structures on Earth. They are stark, brutal, and powerful, and they demonstrate a knowledge of astronomy and engineering that is utterly at odds with the supposed primitive nature of their builders. Stonehenge, on the Salisbury Plain in England, is the most famous of these. It is not just a temple, it is a sophisticated astronomical observatory, an analog computer built of stone, designed to predict lunar and solar eclipses with remarkable accuracy. It is a calendar that tracks the seasons, a celestial clock that marks the slow, inexorable turning of the heavens. The construction of Stonehenge was a feat of titanic effort. The massive sarsen stones, weighing up to 40 tons, were dragged from a quarry over 30 kilometers away. But the smaller blue stones, which form the inner circle, are a geological anomaly. They come from the Preseli Hills in Wales, nearly 250 kilometers away. How did a Neolithic people, with no wheels and no roads, transport dozens of these multi-ton stones across rugged mountains and treacherous waters? The sheer logistical challenge is so immense that many have refused to believe it. It represents a level of social organization and technical skill that seems impossible for the period. And for what? Why invest generations of labor, the entire output of a society, into building this one precise machine? Modern research has revealed another layer to Stonehenge's mystery, its acoustic properties. The arrangement of the stones creates a unique soundscape. Certain frequencies are amplified while others are dampened. Standing in the center, chants or drum beats would have created a powerful, disorienting, and perhaps trance-inducing sensory experience. It was not just an observatory, it was a giant resonator, a machine designed to alter consciousness. This fusion of science and ritual gives us a clue to its purpose. The knowledge of the cosmos was not an abstract, intellectual pursuit. It was a source of power, a way to connect with the forces that governed their world. And this connection often came at a terrible price. Excavations at and around Stonehenge have revealed numerous burials, many showing signs of violent death, suggesting that human sacrifice was an important part of the integral part of the site's function. This pattern of sophisticated astronomy and brutal ritual is repeated across megalithic Europe. In Ireland, the tomb of Newgrange, older than both Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids, is a marvel of engineering. It is a massive circular mound covering an acre of land, built with over 200,000 tons of stone. Its most incredible feature is a small opening above the entrance, the roof box. For a few days around the winter solstice, and only then, the rising sun casts a narrow beam of light that penetrates a 19-meter-long passage and illuminates the central chamber for about 17 minutes. It is an annual celestial event captured perfectly in stone, but the chamber it illuminates is a tomb, a place of the dead. The knowledge of the stars was inextricably linked to death and the underworld. These were not peaceful astronomer priests. They were tribal societies engaged in a constant, brutal struggle for survival and dominance. The control of these places of power, like Stonehenge and Newgrange, would have been a matter of life and death. The tribe that could predict the eclipses, that could mark the turning of the seasons, held the key to agriculture, to ritual, and to power. The knowledge was a weapon, and it was jealously guarded. The ferocity of their culture is a stark contrast to the cold, mathematical precision of their creations. It is as if they were clinging to a fragment of a much higher science, a science they could use but no longer fully understand. The result was a volatile mixture of genius and savagery. Official archaeology has long been content to label these sites as ritual centers or tombs, focusing on the primitive cults and ignoring the scientific knowledge embedded within them. It is easier to imagine grunting savages piling up stones for a sun god than it is to contemplate a Neolithic society with a deep understanding of celestial mechanics. But the evidence of the stones themselves refutes this simplistic view. They speak of a legacy, a tradition of knowledge that was ancient even when Stonehenge was new. The megalithic builders of Europe were not the inventors of this science. They were the last European inheritors of the global blueprint, trying to keep a flickering flame of knowledge alive in a dark and violent world. The cruelty and irrationality we see in their rituals may be the inevitable consequence of receiving knowledge without wisdom. When the scientific principles are forgotten and only the operational formulas remain, science degenerates into magic, and magic in the hands of desperate men often demands blood. This was the nightmare of megalithic Europe, a world of immense, ancient wisdom trapped within a culture of primeval horror. The builders struggled not just against the wildness of nature, but against the darkness within themselves. This darkness, this fear of forbidden knowledge, did not end with the fall of the pagan tribes. It was institutionalized, perfected, and turned into a weapon of continental control by a new power rising from the ashes of Rome, an organization that would hunt down the last remnants of the blueprint and attempt to either bury them forever or lock them away in its own secret vaults. The fall of the Roman Empire plunged Europe into a dark age, a time of chaos and lost knowledge. Libraries were burned, cities depopulated, and the intricate machinery of civilization ground to a halt. But in this vacuum, a new power rose to preeminence: the Church. From its center in Rome, it began a centuries-long project to unify Europe under a single faith. And a key part of that project was the systematic suppression and destruction of all competing knowledge systems, especially those that hinted at a human history older and grander than the one described in the Bible. The Church became the ultimate censor, and its primary target was the lingering residue of the ancient blueprint. Legends persist of a secret library deep in the vaults of the Vatican containing texts that survived the burning of the Great Library of Alexandria and other ancient cataclysms. Maps of the world as it was before the last ice age, scientific treatises from forgotten empires, histories of pre-Christian civilizations. Officially, this is a myth, but the actions of the Church throughout history suggest a deep-seated fear of something, a frantic effort to control the narrative of the past. The hunt for heretical knowledge was not just about theological purity. It was an intelligence operation designed to locate and neutralize dangerous information. Consider the Knights Templar. The official story is that this powerful military order was created to protect pilgrims in the Holy Land, but their first major operation was to spend nearly a decade excavating beneath the ruins of Solomon's Temple in Jerusalem. They were not searching for the Ark of the Covenant or other religious relics. Their true quest was for the practical knowledge, the sacred geometry and architectural secrets that were said to have been the foundation of Solomon's power, knowledge that stretched back to ancient Egypt and beyond. When the Templars returned to Europe, they became incredibly wealthy and powerful with astonishing speed, their influence spreading through a network of preceptories that were marvels of administration and logistics. They became the bankers to kings and popes. Did they find what they were looking for? The brutal, sudden efficiency with which they were destroyed in the early 14th century suggests they did. They were accused of heresy, of worshipping a strange bearded head. But their true crime may have been possessing a knowledge so powerful it threatened the authority of both church and state. The Inquisition was the church's ultimate weapon in this secret war. For centuries, its agents spread across Europe, hunting heretics. We remember them for their persecution of religious dissenters, but many of their victims were not heretics. They were scholars, alchemists, and natural philosophers who had stumbled upon fragments of the old science. Men and women were burned at the stake for possessing books on astronomy, mathematics, or medicine that contradicted church doctrine. The philosopher Giordano Bruno was burned in Rome in the year 1600. His crime was not just proposing that the stars were other suns and that the universe contained infinite worlds. He was part of a network of Renaissance humanists who were actively rediscovering the lost knowledge of the ancient world, translating texts by figures like Hermes Trismegistus, who spoke of a primordial universal science. Bruno was not killed for a philosophical idea. He was eliminated because he was a keeper of dangerous data. This was an age of spies and scholars, of double lives and deadly secrets. The race for ancient manuscripts became a clandestine war fought in the back rooms of monasteries and the hidden libraries of nobles. On one side were the agents of the Vatican seeking to acquire and sequester any text that threatened the established order. On the other were the humanists of the Renaissance, driven by a thirst for knowledge, who saw in these ancient texts the key to liberating humanity from centuries of ignorance. It was an intellectual thriller played out on a continental scale. The stakes were nothing less than the control of reality itself. A single rediscovered map, a forgotten astronomical table, a description of an ancient technological process, any of these could shatter the foundations of faith and power that had been so carefully constructed over 1,000 years. The church was not just destroying knowledge, in some cases it was absorbing it. The great Gothic cathedrals built during this period are masterpieces of sacred geometry, their proportions and layouts based on the same principles of harmony and resonance found in older pagan sites. Many cathedrals, like Chartres in France, were built directly on top of ancient megalithic mounds and sacred wells. The church did not eradicate the old power, it co-opted it, rebranding it for its own purposes. It became the new guardian of the keys, deciding what fragments of the ancient knowledge could be safely released to the world and what had to remain locked away forever in the archives. This age of faith was, in reality, an age of profound fear, fear of a truth that could unravel everything. As the Renaissance gave way to the age of enlightenment and exploration, this secret hunt for knowledge would break out of the monasteries and libraries of Europe and go global, transforming from a war of ideas into a worldwide scramble for artifacts of power. The Age of Enlightenment in the 18th century promised a new era of reason, science, and progress. It also launched a new phase in the hunt for the ancient blueprint, the Age of Great Plunder. As European colonial empires expanded across the globe, they began a systematic campaign to loot the cultural treasures of the civilizations they conquered. This was not just about acquiring pretty objects for museums. It was a strategic intelligence gathering operation on a planetary scale. Armies were accompanied by teams of scholars, scientists, and engineers tasked with mapping, measuring, and analyzing the ruins of the ancient world, searching for any hint of lost knowledge or superior technology. Napoleon Bonaparte's campaign in Egypt in 1798 is the prime example. He brought with him not just soldiers, but a corps of 167 of France's leading scientists and scholars. While his army fought the Mamluks, his savants conducted the first modern, systematic survey of the monuments of ancient Egypt. They measured every angle of the pyramids, copied every hieroglyph, and created a comprehensive catalogue of a civilization that had fascinated Europe for centuries. But Napoleon's interest was not purely academic. There is a famous, and perhaps apocryphal story of him spending a night alone inside the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid. He emerged the next morning pale and shaken, and for the rest of his life refused to speak of what he experienced. Was he looking for a mystical vision, or was he searching for something tangible? A hidden chamber, a piece of technology, a key to the pyramid's true function. The British Empire followed suit, becoming the world's foremost collectors of ancient artifacts. The British Museum in London became a repository for the plundered heritage of humanity, the Rosetta Stone and countless statues from Egypt, the Elgin marbles from the Parthenon in Greece, sacred texts from India. This was cultural appropriation on an epic scale, justified by the arrogant belief that the British were better equipped to preserve these treasures than their native owners. But beneath this veneer of preservation was a predatory hunt for power. Colonial administrators and military officers on the ground were on the lookout for anything unusual, anything that hinted at anomalous properties or forgotten science. This colonial race for artifacts fueled a new era of exploration and adventure, often with tragic consequences. The jungles of the Amazon, the deserts of Africa, and the remote islands of the Pacific became the new frontiers in the search. The story of Colonel Percy Fawcett is a cautionary tale. A British surveyor and explorer, Fawcett became obsessed with finding a lost ancient city in the Brazilian jungle, which he called Zid. He believed it was a remnant of an advanced, pre-Diluvian civilization, perhaps the capital of Atlantis itself. His quest was not just a romantic adventure. Based on old documents and local legends, he believed Z held the key to understanding the origins of the global blueprint civilization. In 1925, Fawcett, his son, and their companion vanished without a trace in the Mato Grosso region. They were swallowed by the jungle, another sacrifice to the insatiable hunger for forbidden knowledge. The oceans, too, began to give up their secrets. With the development of deep-sea diving, explorers started to find things that should not exist. The Antikythera mechanism, a complex astronomical computer discovered in a Roman-era shipwreck off the coast of Greece, was a profound shock. Its intricate system of bronze gears was a level of mechanical sophistication that was not thought to have existed until the clockmakers of 14th century Europe. It was a tangible piece of lost science, a ghost from a machine-making tradition that had vanished from history. Other, more controversial finds, like the so-called Piri-Reis map of 1513, which appears to show the coast of Antarctica without its ice cap, hinted at a forgotten age of global exploration and cartography. The spirit of the age was a strange mixture of rationalism and rapacity. The empires that prided themselves on their scientific progress were driven by an almost mystical belief that the secrets of the ancients could give them a decisive edge in their rivalries. The hunt for the blueprint was no longer a secret war fought by monks and heretics. It was now an open, if undeclared, policy of competing global powers. Archaeology became a cover for espionage. Scientific expeditions provided plausible deniability for intelligence missions. The artifacts they collected were not just historical curiosities, they were potential assets. The keys found in the tombs of Egypt or the jungles of the Amazon were not expected to open a door to the heavens but to the halls of power in London, Paris, or Berlin. This geopolitical scramble would reach its terrifying climax in the 20th century, when the search for ancient knowledge became fused with modern ideology and the quest for the ultimate weapon. The dawn of the 20th century brought with it a new kind of fever. The simmering rivalries of the colonial empires were about to explode into global war, and in the shadows the hunt for the blueprint took on a desperate, sinister urgency. The search was no longer just for knowledge or influence, it was for a decisive weapon, a Wunderwaffe that could guarantee world domination. This dark quest found its most fervent and terrifying disciples in the secret societies that underpinned the rising Nazi regime in Germany. The most infamous of these was the Ahnenerbe, the ancestral heritage organization established by Heinrich Himmler to research the archaeological and cultural history of the Aryan race. On the surface, it was a scholarly institution. In reality, it was the occultic wing of the SS, a bizarre fusion of pseudoscience, archaeology, and espionage. The Ahnenerbe dispatched expeditions to the far corners of the world, driven by the belief that the Aryans were the descendants of a godlike race of Atlantean survivors who had spread their knowledge across the globe. Their missions to Tibet, Antarctica, and the Middle East were not the mystical nonsense they are often portrayed as. They were highly targeted searches for what the Nazis believed to be the scientific legacy of their ancestors: texts, artifacts, and technologies related to advanced energy sources, unconventional weaponry, and genetic engineering. In Tibet, they searched for the hidden kingdom of Shambhala, which they believed was a center of ancient Aryan wisdom. In Iraq and Egypt, their agents competed directly with British and Soviet intelligence, vying for control of ancient sites that were rumored to contain powerful artifacts. This secret war for the past was fought in parallel with the conventional battles of World War II. While scientists in the United States of America worked frantically on the Manhattan Project to build the atomic bomb, they were not the only ones studying ancient texts for clues to immense power. The Hindu epic, the Mahabharata, contains vivid descriptions of a weapon called the Brahmastra, a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe, which created an incandescent column of smoke and fire, causing hair and nails to fall out and pottery to break without apparent cause. To J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, these ancient verses sounded disturbingly familiar. Was it just poetic metaphor, or was it a distorted description of a real, prehistoric nuclear event? In this charged atmosphere of secret science and imminent apocalypse, the work of inventors like Nikola Tesla takes on a new light. Tesla was a genius who was decades ahead of his time. His experiments with wireless energy transmission, resonance, and what he called the ether were aimed at providing the world with free, limitless energy. He envisioned a global system where power would be broadcast through the air and the Earth itself. His designs for a Wardenclyffe Tower were, in essence, a plan to turn the planet into a giant electrical resonator. But where did he get these revolutionary ideas? Some researchers have noted the striking similarity between Tesla's concepts of resonance and the geometric and acoustic properties of the pyramids. Was Tesla's genius a case of rediscovery rather than invention? A brilliant mind reverse engineering the lost principles of a planetary energy grid that had been built millennia before? His work was suppressed, his funding cut, and his laboratory mysteriously burned down. He died penniless and alone. Was he a failed inventor, or was he a man who got too close to a truth the world's power brokers were not ready to handle? The period leading up to and during the Second World War was a chaotic whirlwind of airship disasters, mysterious explosions at scientific facilities, and the sudden, unexplained deaths of key researchers. We see these as isolated incidents. But what if they were links in a single chain? Skirmishes in a hidden global war for the heritage of the ancients, the occult Reich of the Ahnenerbe, the intelligence services of the Allies, the lone geniuses like Tesla. They were all players in a deadly game. The prize was not just winning the war, but inheriting the power of the gods. The pursuit of knowledge had become an obsession with power, a Faustian bargain that brought the world to the brink of self-destruction. This race for ancient secrets did not end with the fall of Berlin in 1945. It simply went deeper underground, transforming once more with the arrival of a new, all-seeing technology that would finally reveal the full picture, and with it, the final, most terrible secret of all. Are you a believer in the power of ancient wisdom, or do you think it is all just dangerous mythology? Let the world know your answer in the comments below. The end of the Second World War did not end the secret race for the blueprint. It simply changed the players and the tools. The hot war of ideologies gave way to the Cold War of espionage, and the hunt for ancient knowledge went digital. The development of satellite remote sensing, ground-penetrating radar, and eventually light detection and ranging, known as LiDAR, gave researchers a god's-eye view of the planet. For the first time, it was possible to strip away the jungles, drain the oceans, and erase the sands of time, revealing the faint, geometric scars of forgotten structures hidden beneath. The results were breathtaking, and they confirmed the wildest hypotheses of the previous generation. From space, the pattern was no longer a matter of speculation. It was a mathematical certainty. LiDAR scans of the Amazon basin revealed the remains of a vast network of cities and causeways, laid out in precise geometric patterns, in a region previously thought to be pristine wilderness. Satellite archaeology in Egypt uncovered hundreds of new potential sites, showing that the structures we knew were just a tiny fraction of a much larger complex. The global grid was no longer a fringe theory drawn with lines on a map. It was visible, measurable, and undeniable. Hundreds of ancient sites across every continent were demonstrably linked by a single, sophisticated system of geodesy and astronomy. The blueprint was real. The sheer volume of this new data was overwhelming. No single human mind could process it all. And so, humanity turned to its newest creation, artificial intelligence. Researchers began feeding the vast datasets, archaeological surveys, geological records, mythological texts, astronomical charts, into powerful neural networks. They tasked the machines with a simple goal: find the pattern. The result was the final terrifying confirmation. The AI did not just confirm the grid, it deciphered its logic. It revealed the underlying mathematical language, the complex interplay of geometry, precession, and planetary mechanics. It laid bare the master plan. The discovery should have been the greatest moment in human history, the final unveiling of our true past. It was immediately classified at the highest possible level. The race for knowledge moved from the physical world into cyberspace. The data, now the most valuable secret on Earth, became the target of a new kind of war. Tech giants, private military corporations, and the intelligence agencies of every major power waged a silent, relentless battle against shadowy hacker groups and whistleblowers for control of this information. To possess the blueprint was to possess the ultimate key, not just to the past, but to the future, because the AI had discovered something else, something far more disturbing than a map of ancient sites. The blueprint was not just a monument to a lost golden age, it was a warning system. Embedded within the global grid, within the long count calendars and the precessional alignments, was a clear, unambiguous message. The architects of the system were obsessed with time, not because they were historians, but because they were survivors. The entire planetary machine was a clock designed to track the long cycles of cosmic and geological upheaval. It predicted orbital variations, magnetic field fluctuations, and the periodic bombardments of comet streams that trigger ice ages and global floods. The blueprint was a doomsday clock, and it was telling a story of cyclical catastrophe. Our planet is not a safe harbor. It is a dangerous place, subject to periodic, civilization-ending disasters. The builders of the grid knew this. They had lived through at least one such event, and they had left behind a desperate message for those who would come after. A survival guide for the end of the world. This revelation created a panic among the small, powerful group of scientists, military leaders, and tech billionaires who now held this secret. They finally understood. The myths were true. History was a repeating cycle of destruction and rebirth. And according to the blueprint's calculations, our own civilization was rapidly approaching the window for the next catastrophic event. What should they do? Release the information to the public? The truth would shatter every religion, every economic system, every political structure on the planet. It would trigger global panic, resource wars, and a complete breakdown of society. Faced with inevitable doom, humanity would tear itself apart long before the sky fell. Could you accept a truth that rewrites the entire history of humanity? So they made a decision. A terrible, perhaps necessary decision. A tacit, informal alliance was formed, a new, silent conspiracy. They decided to become the new guardians, to protect humanity from a truth it was not ready to bear. The greatest discovery in history was to be buried once more. The research was publicly debunked and discredited. The data was scrubbed from public servers and locked behind impenetrable firewalls. The few who tried to speak out were silenced, their careers ruined, their voices lost in the digital noise. The age of revelation was over. A new, final age of secrecy had begun, a digital conspiracy of silence to save the world from itself. And so the story comes full circle. We are left once again with the silent stones, the enigmatic ruins, and the persistent whisper of a forgotten past. The truth is out there, but it has been deliberately hidden, deemed too dangerous for us to know. The new guardians believe they are acting in our best interests, preserving order and preventing chaos. They have chosen a saving lie over a potentially fatal truth. But as we look at our world teetering on the brink of its own self-made crises, we must ask, is this ignorance truly bliss? Or is the very knowledge they are hiding the one thing that could unite us, the one tool that could ensure our survival? Perhaps the greatest risk is not in knowing our fate, but in blindly refusing to look at the clock. They chose to bury the truth, believing it would save us from ourselves, a benevolent deception to maintain order. But in a world fractured by conflict and facing unprecedented challenges, could this hidden knowledge be our last, best hope? What do you believe is the greater danger to our future, the world-shattering chaos that a terrible truth might unleash, or the fragile order maintained by a comfortable planet-sized lie? Write your final choice in the comments. The future is an unwritten page, and your opinion helps shape the story.